Hi, I'm Chloe Crawford, and this is my submission for the Future of Cities final project, What Could Urban Life Be Like in 2042? First, we're going to talk about the physical dimension of the city, because that, as well as physical qualities, have a great influence on cities and how the concept of place and mobility affects overall relationships. So, pictured here is the concentric zone model. This model shows how a city grows outward radially. And in the picture, you can see each ring is color coded and labeled, and it shows how the middle is the central business district, and around it is the zone of transition, the zone of independent workers' homes, the zone of better residences, and then the final commuter zone. I think this model will show a lot about the social dimension of the city, and it shows how class relations and physical interpersonal relations come about. So talking about social dimensions, in Module 3, the social dimension of the city, it talked about relationships, house segregation, and demographic trends. And The Metropolis and Mental Life by George Simmel stated that the deepest problems of modern life come from the individual desire to persevere, autonomy, and individuality of their existence in the face of social change. It also talked about how the metropolitan type of man develops an organ that protects him against the questionable outside world. In The Modular Man by A. Toffler, students flock to Fort Lauderdale, Florida because of the diversity of temporary interpersonal relationships, and these interpersonal relationships increasingly characterize human relations as we move towards superindustrialism. And people in cities cannot know their neighbors very intimately. If they interacted with everyone in their cities like neighbors, mental health would surely spiral. In Cyborg Citizen, an additional reading by Mitchell, it talked about the telephone and how that isn't technically replacing face-to-face human interaction, but it's talking about a new form of contact that we're moving towards. And in the Redlining and Racial Covenants video in this module, the HOLC established designations for neighborhoods based on occupants of those neighborhoods, which is overall called redlining. And that's linked to spatial desirability with racial occupancy, institutionalized and spread racial covenants all over the nation. It also enabled subsequent systems of inequality to take hold, and the housing segregation in the North was just like Jim Crow in the South. Again, going back to the concentric model, as economies have changed over time, contrary to one of the videos that we watched in an earlier module, the wealthier people lived on the inside of the cities, and the poor people lived farther away on the less desirable outskirts of town. And the most fundamental change to emerge of this time was capitalism and its new system of production. Capitalism and the new system of production consisted of two social groups, which were industrialist capitalist and unskilled factory workers. And here they formed the basis of a new elite and proletariat. Land use during this time, with the emergence of factories and warehouses, became crucial. These were given to those who could pay rent, and it was no longer given to traditional groups like churches and things like that. Homes weren't being used as workplaces anymore, and neighborhoods created status division at this. And that information came from Chapter 2, The Changing Economic Context of Cities. In Chapter 3, The National Economy, World Economy, it talked about how yesterday's over, and now we're adjusting to living in a world of interdependent communities. We cannot recapture the title that we had as a world dominant power because we're no longer an industrial economy. The US is shifting from being isolated, self-reliant national economy to part of an interdependent global economy, which means giving up the dominant role as a world dominant force and instead becoming an economically strong country, which few countries are. And to do this, we need to put down our old tasks and pick up new tasks that will bring us into the future. As far as environment and globalization go, in the video Sustainable Cities by Crash Course Geography, they talked about climatopias being utopian urban designs that attempt to address climate change, which are futuristic versions that architects and designers seek to create sustainable urban settlements in the face of mounting environmental threats. And in order to have successful climatopias, we need to think about infrastructure as well as people. And the image shown is an early climatopia in Jalisco that I found. As far as globalization goes, it is the independence of many individual markets. Today's globalizations are new and are leading to the radical restructuring of national economies and societies. And with new globalizations of finance and things like cyberspace, major cities have become expressions of the new global information based economies. Investments, again, in people and infrastructure are key at this time. And this is from Henderson's Beyond Globalization. And on globalization, geopolitics, and connectivity, Parag Khanna poses the question, how do you assess the effects of globalization across the planet? And at this time, we're currently entering the age of hyperglobalization. And right now, it's an important consequence that's causing a privileged connection between cities, economies, private actors, while reducing the ability of the states and governments to filter those relationships. And one main consequence of globalization is that it's difficult for global circumstances of multi-civilizational multipolarity. Now, as far as technology goes, I think this is the most important part of cities that we can practically reach. In Ruchelman's Chapter 2, The Transformation of Urban America, it talked about the pre-industrial city, the early industrial city, and how an increase in city population went from not very big to a huge change. Steam power was huge and enabled the expansion of ports and trade along waterways as we changed from a port-dominated trading economy. And railway transportation enabled trade from Baltimore to the Ohio Valley, proving that early transportation technology could be profitable, as well as the Continental Railroad, which connected the East to the West, which revolutionized transportation. Automobiles also came about at this time, and telephones also, and they both increased the movement of people, goods, and ideas. I think the most interesting part of this is connecting our current day with science fiction and the predictions that we've accomplished at this time. Some things that we've imagined through science fiction have already happened, such as personal communication devices, smartphones, and people mover devices. And going along with science fiction, we now have artificial intelligence, which is used in planning and to gain insights into consumer behavior and characteristics that help improve logistics now. So in conclusion, it's hard to tell where exactly we'll be in 20 years, but based on the knowledge I've obtained from this class and the trends we can see, we can expect changes in the physical and social dimensions, economy, environment, and technology of future cities. Megacities will continue to grow, and technology, capital, and talent will connect to ensure that this happens. Artificial intelligence will likely be more prevalent, and human connection should be expected to go beyond screens and into a more 3D approach. Integration and accessibility for people of all kinds is to be expected, as well as aids in mobility. And then here are my sources for my images. Thank you.